Well, as I promised, Dean Michael Wolf is here, and he is here to welcome you. So here is a man who needs no introduction, Dean Wolf.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to have you all here and the program that you're doing. I think that in terms of this region, and I've been around here for 40 years, I don't think there's anything that's more profoundly affecting us, the health of our region and our people. And I thank you for putting this together, the organizers. And I know I missed the introductions from all those fancy elected officials, so I'm happy to have you here, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. I really enjoy hosting these kinds of things. It's all part of our deal. Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Tidwell from Region 7 is here to welcome our speaker today. Let's give her a round of applause. Come on.
I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Assistant Secretary Gustavo Velasquez has been a champion for fair housing and has done a tremendous job to help families access opportunity. Prior to his appointment at HUD, Assistant Secretary Velasquez served as the Executive Director of the Latino Economic Development Center, where he was committed to assisting underserved populations gain the necessary skills and capital to start and maintain their own businesses. He has been a long-time advocate for affordable housing and accessible housing. Throughout his career, the Assistant Secretary has worked diligently to protect our most vulnerable populations. We are fortunate to have him leading HUD's Office of Fair Housing in Washington. Please join me in welcoming Assistant Secretary Gustavo Velasquez.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. This is a terrific venue. Thank you, Jennifer, for the kind introduction. Jennifer is a terrific HUD regional administrator, great ambassador to St. Louis from HUD, to the entire state of Missouri, and to the entire Region 7. So let's give Jennifer another warm. I have to say that it's been an honor for me in this year and a half to be in this national role as Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing. I feel that coming here this morning to this very important event covering a very relevant topic, it's also remedying a mistake that on my part, because after a year and a half, it's my first time in this position here in St. Louis. And I feel that with everything that has been happening in this region, I should have been here before. So I'm twice happy that I am here for the event and finally being able to come and talk about significant issues to advance the National Fair Housing Agenda in this region. And I want to take just a few minutes to acknowledge some great partners that we have here in St. Louis. Let me start with some of our HUD staff here in the city of St. Louis. I know that we have James Hurd, the director of the field office. James, where are you? Right there is James. And we have also two important people from the Office of Fair Housing, our great regional director for the Office of Fair Housing, Betty Bottinger, right here, as well as, Eddie Wards. Where is Eddie? Our FHEO field director here. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge a terrific partner that we have in EHOC and its very effective leader, Will Jordan. Where are you, Will? For all the great work that Will does. When I started in 2014, I remember one of the first cases that we highlighted at the national level was this case, you remember, Will, better than anyone else, Midland, the Midland Bank settlement, allegedly a bank that allegedly did not want to do business in majority-minority communities here in St. Louis and other parts of the Midwest. And I thought that was a terrific settlement, great work by EHOC, and that's just a small example. Out of that settlement, I think nearly $8 million that Midland would dedicate in loans, investment loans in majority, minority, African American, Hispanic communities. So EHOC does a great, terrific job as a FIP organization, not just in this area, but we highlight EHOC as a major player in our FIP program across the country. And the city of St. Louis, the entire team of Mayor Slay, I know that we have Fred Wessels, the director of the city's community development administration here, and of course our strong partner here in the city, Charles Bryson, the director of the city's Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. Charles, let's give Charles a big hand as well. And you know, EHOC as a FIP agency and Charles as a FAP agency have a terrific collaboration here. That's the way it should work, as the FIP organization talks to the community, understands the issues that people are dealing with, and then works with the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency to investigate complaints of housing discrimination. And I know Charles covers employment and other things. That is the kind of a strong partnership that we want in our private fair housing organizations and our local and state government organizations. And I also know that we have here the Missouri, Alice, are you, I don't know if Alice is here, but yeah, great. Let's give Alice also a big hand from the Missouri State Agency. And to all of you for committing to spend today hearing, learning, contributing to the conversation of furthering fair housing, moving the needle in the right direction around inclusive and integrated housing in this region. I commend you because St. Louis, in terms of protecting people from discrimination in housing, not only covers the groups that we protect at the federal level, but you have two other critically important protections. Protections on the basis of sexual orientation in housing discrimination, and protections on the basis of source of income. So people that are denied housing because they rent homes or apartments with subsidies from the federal government, vouchers and things like that. So it's a great testament of the leadership of the city of St. Louis that has expanded these protections in housing. So thank you for being here. The objective in the next 15, 20 minutes, for me, my hope is that I am able to frame the discussion that you will have throughout the day on the policy, the new policy of affirmatively furthering fair housing, but frame the discussion in a more fundamental level to help talk about the ideals and the principles that lie behind the efforts that we are making at the national level to further fair housing, to move our country in a way that we have corrective actions and that we move actions at the city and state level to create more opportunity in housing for all Americans. And what I want to start with just this basic fundamental idea, which is that America was founded on the principles of justice and equality. That is some basic premise that we can all agree with. In fact, just less than a block from here, as I was walking, I saw a small memorial in front of the Federal District Court that reads, "Let the well-being of the people be the supreme law." And, I don't know how many of you have walked by the federal court and noticed that phrasing, but that is just a very fundamental idea that we all cherish as Americans. But all of us in this room know that the fundamental idea that hard work and determination will open the door for a better life is not evenly realized, because access to opportunity, to real opportunity, is not available to all. And we know the stories way, way close to home here. Today, the inequality gap is growing at a very, very rapid pace. It is one of the biggest threats confronting our country. Because if we see how the inequality gap is growing, and we compare that with where the United States will be 20 or 30 years from now in terms of the demographic shift, if we don't work hard on this big problem we have, we may very well stop in the near future from being the undisputed land of opportunity that we claim to be in the world. Particularly the inequality gap confronted by many people when it comes to educational attainment and upward economic mobility. And at the intersection of this problem, the issue of access to opportunity, or lack of access to opportunity, is housing. Because housing is an anchor that dictates so many other facets of our life and how we prosper and we help our children prosper growing up. What do I mean by that? Well, just think about what are the factors that you consider when you're choosing a home. The quality of the elementary or middle school you're going to send your kids to, the kind of transportation options you have available to go easily to and from work so that you spend less time commuting and more time with your kids at night, amenities like a good library nearby, a good park, food options. What's the quality of food around for where you live? What's the quality of, in terms of crime? You want to make sure that you live in a neighborhood that is not infested with crime. The quality of air that you breathe. And for those who've been following the news lately, the quality of water our children drink. I mean, all of this are things that we all consider when choosing where to live. Fair housing is about housing choice. It's about being able to go where you decide to live because you know that you and your children would have better access to opportunity. But despite the progress, and we have done an amazing amount of progress. The Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, almost 50 years ago. So it is evident that we have made an enormous amount of progress. But it is also evident that today, the zip code where a child grows up all too often remains a strong predictor of that child's success. What's more, when we look at intergenerational mobility, the extent to which economic and social outcomes for a child are determined by their own efforts rather than by their circumstances at birth, we see that this important indicator is lower in this country than in most similarly situated wealthy countries. 25% of the children in our country that grow up, I would say children born in the 25% 90% bottom of family incomes have nearly a 50% chance of being poor when they grow up. For white children, that chance of growing up poor, if they are poor when they are kids, is 32%. But for black kids, the chances of being poor when they grow up, if they are poor when they're children, is 63%. So the nation has seen stark examples of the civil disturbances that erupt because of what? The frustration and the sense of hopelessness that communities like African American, Hispanics, and other minorities feel as a result of being locked in communities with little access to jobs, good schools, and neighborhood amenities. Now, there's no magic bullet when it comes to addressing inequality, but I believe that if America is truly to become the country that our framers of the Constitution envision, I think we must begin by demonstrating that we live by those principles upon which this nation was founded. That's why, for me, it's important to frame what we're trying to do with this national regulation to affirmatively further fair housing in the context of even, such as basic ideals that we, again, cherish as Americans. The Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing initiative that HUD is in the process of implementing is critical, and I believe will be a very consequential, very, very consequential policy when we're 20, 30 years out, and we look back and see what we put in place in order to give cities, states, guidelines, a planning framework with uniformity across the country to further fair housing. Now, there are some real facts about this issue of affirmatively furthering fair housing. First one is that this is not new. When the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, it was obviously a response to blatant housing discrimination that people were facing. And so, if you recall, looking at the history of the Fair Housing Act, soon after Dr. King was assassinated, Congress got together, President Johnson, stood in front of Congress and said, we need to honor the legacy of this man, and protecting people from housing discrimination was something that he had worked so hard, and it had not been addressed by legislation. So 10 days later, the Fair Housing Act passed. But it wasn't just a bill to provide people with redress, to bring about claims that they were being discriminated, to provide justice in that sense. It was also legislation that required the country to take proactive or affirmative steps to overcome the legacy of segregation. So that mandate to affirmatively further fair housing was very, very purposefully inserted as part of the Fair Housing Act. So the obligation is not new. I don't often talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing as an obligation. That's just a fact I mentioned. I like to frame it in the context, again, of access to opportunity and what we need to do as a collective to lift people up from situations they live in neighborhoods of high residential segregation they live in. But the fact that it's nearly a 50-year-old legal obligation is undisputed. Now, first and foremost, that obligation is of the federal government. The federal government is obligated by this law to affirmatively further fair housing and use its power, resources that are deployed throughout the country to make sure that that national policy of fair and inclusive housing is advanced through the resources of the federal government. Now, this final rule provides states, municipalities, housing authorities that receive funding with a planning framework that is uniform again, so that on their own, the city of St. Louis, the county, surrounding jurisdictions, on their own, on your own, set attainable, realistic goals, assess the opportunities that they have to proactively eliminate obstacles to housing choice, and set a plan to advance the national policy of fair and inclusive housing that is most effective to those jurisdictions. The initiative is not, unlike our critics say, about big government takeover of the municipalities, local control, and local governance. Rather, it is about creating partnerships, providing after so long guidelines and a framework, but more importantly, the partnership aspect of it, of teaming up with local jurisdictions to make sure that we get this right after so many years that we have ignored this issue in a comprehensive way. And so we establish this policy, we issue this rule, and we have the next 4 and 5 years to begin implemented throughout the country. And the changes will take time. We will be patient to see over time changes as a result of the implementation of this rule. But in a real sense, it is about working with jurisdictions through the initiative to provide municipalities with the information, the tools, guidance, support, technical assistance. But let me highlight data, because jurisdictions need the data in front of them to make sure that this analysis of fair housing works for them. And we are providing that. Why? Ultimately, the goals are simple: improve integrated living patterns, overcome historic patterns of residential segregation, reduce bureaucracy. We have worked very, very hard to reduce the administrative burden that this new policy imposes on jurisdictions, and find their own way, their own path to bridge racial divides, creating equal housing and connecting people to opportunity. And here in this region, we have the city of St. Charles and what is the county that we have this year? Jefferson County, as the first 2 jurisdictions within the Metro St. Louis area in this year, in the cycle of implementation this year. Now, I don't want to be very specific about the contents of the rule. I think that you will have speakers following me that will drill down, and tomorrow we have George Williams from my office, who leads the implementation efforts, to talk about how that is going. But I just want to highlight this important aspect of the rule, which is an assessment of fair housing, is the way that the rule becomes basically operational, replaces what we used to call the analysis of impediments to housing choice. And this assessment of fair housing will help jurisdictions determine the factors, the barriers to housing choice. What are the factors that contribute to the issues that are identified, and then have them develop a plan to overcoming them. Again, Jefferson County, city of St. Charles, and as jurisdictions prepare to conduct and submit their assessments of fair housing, we are encouraging them to look for opportunities to work with other jurisdictions to participate in joint submissions. Now, let me say this. I am keenly aware of the complexities in this region. If I'm not mistaken, someone yesterday told me that the county of St. Louis has something like 90 jurisdictions within. Then we have the city of St. Louis. Then we have other counties and cities around the county of St. Louis. So we're looking at over 100 of different jurisdictions, different forms of governments, different players. It's a mounting task to start and follow through an endeavor of doing a regional taking really a regional approach to furthering fair housing at the regional level here. I'm keenly aware of that. But I'm going to use the opportunity and the microphone to say this. I think that there's some levers that we can use, and I really encourage the city of St. Louis, the county, to begin thinking about what opportunities lie for regional collaboration. I think that this is something that if we do at the regional level will be most effective for what we're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, for people, these boundaries are invisible. They cross them every day. They know that there are differences in opportunity between them. So it is, I think, important to consider always a regional approach to these types of, yes. Now, let me just talk, before I conclude, about two other important elements of this policy. Flexibility and balanced approach. What do I mean by that? Jurisdictions will have the flexibility to develop a variety of fair housing strategies and actions based, as I said, on their individual assessments. For example, a program participant, the city, may develop affordable housing that promotes integration in areas of high opportunity, or choose to preserve affordable housing in other areas as part of a place-based strategy to revitalize racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Another program participant may work to remove barriers to the development of affordable housing in areas with low poverty and more proficient schools by, for example, seeking to amend local zoning or land use laws, or allocating funding for affordable housing through the home program and or the low-income housing tax credit program. We're working right now as we speak on the planning framework that states will use, because the states as funding recipients are just as important in this requirement as their cities and counties. So we're thinking very, very hard about the levers at the state level. And the low-income housing tax credit is a significant lever at the state level to expand opportunity through production in areas of high opportunity. The key point is that each will be developing assessments that work best for their individual fair housing challenges and circumstances. And regarding balanced approach, I'm referring to the use of both place-based and mobility strategies that are specific to the local and regional context and history of barriers to fair housing choice. Place-based strategies could include making investments in segregated, high poverty neighborhoods that improve conditions and eliminate disparities in access to opportunity between residents of those neighborhoods and the rest of the jurisdiction and region. Or it could include maintaining and preserving existing affordable housing stock, including HUD-assisted housing, to reduce disproportionate housing needs. As long as, I would argue, revitalization of this distressed neighborhood doesn't just mean building or rehabbing more housing. Has to be a concerted, a comprehensive revitalization strategy, because this is about access to opportunity, the connection with all the other aspects of what opportunity is that I mentioned: education, jobs, transit, and so forth. Now, mobility strategies, on the other hand, could include developing affordable housing in areas of opportunity to fight segregation and promote integration, providing greater access to existing affordable housing in areas of opportunity, or creating housing mobility programs. And I'm keenly aware that this area is working towards that. I can see there Phil Teckler, who's been really a champion of housing mobility programs, that effectively connect low-income residents and segregated areas to affordable housing in integrated areas of greater opportunity. Now, we know this approach works, as access to opportunity is often driven by geography. We've seen compelling examples of families whose lives have been empowered by being afforded the chance to move out of densely populated, high-poverty areas to communities of greater opportunity. Some time ago, we heard the stories of families that participated in the mobility program in Baltimore. A single mother that spoke to us spoke very, very keenly about the issues that she was confronted with her daughter who suffered from asthma, and how this asthma was so severely aggravated by the conditions of public housing in a very high poverty neighborhood of Baltimore. And how moving to suburban area improved dramatically her condition and her family condition. How her son was motivated to attend to school and aspired to attend to college. How her daughter's asthma improved. How she decided to enroll in community college and become a drug and alcohol counselor. And it's not only personal testimonials that let us know that mobility can positively impact a family's life. The effects of exposure to better neighborhoods on children are well documented. And we saw that last year, which is a terrific year in fair housing, with the publication of Ras Chetty's work, economist from Stanford, that measured the long-term outcomes for HUD's mobility to opportunity program, and found that upward mobility was greater for young children in low-income families if they were raised in lower poverty neighborhoods. So place matters for the outcomes of children. And right here, our own Secretary Castro has spoken in some of his speeches about this fact that is just astonishing about the life expectancies of a child growing up in Clayton versus a child growing up in Jeff Vanderloo. The difference is 18 years in life expectancy. I mean, when I comment on that, it's like people think that I'm comparing the United States with Bangladesh. Not two neighborhoods that are within 10 miles apart from each other in the same geographic area. I mean, that's just hard to comprehend in this 2015 here. There shouldn't be such a thing in this day and age as being born on the wrong side of the tracks. That was just something that we were talking about in the 60s, but we should not be talking about that almost 50 years later. Now, President Obama has said that solving inequality is the defining challenge of our time, and our nation must answer this call to action by breaking down the barriers that hold people down and shut them out by providing every person with an equal shot at real opportunity. This policy that we've put in place to further fair housing in an affirmative way has a requirement for strong community participation as part of the planning process. We need to make sure that we join forces so that people are mobilized, participate, speak up, especially those sectors of our community that are often don't have a voice. For instance, with disabilities, low-income families, low-income mothers with children, immigrants, communities that often don't participate in local community planning. This is an opportunity that we have to engage them. And remember, for those that work in the planning process, community development planning process, that the results of these exercises to further fair housing will have a connection with the investments that city make with HUD funding. So decisions that you make under the consolidated plan decisions you make under your plan as a housing authority, all of this will be connected. It has to. It has to, so that there is some real follow-through, so that we really carry forward the legacy that we need to level the playing field for all Americans when it comes to deploying resources to maintain, preserve, advance housing opportunities for all. So I just want to say in closing, that I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that you have put together this significant conversation. I think these issues of inequality and advancing opportunity and using housing as a lever and this policy, I really think this is front and center. This should be front and center of the debate this year in the presidential campaign. It is really, ultimately it is about economics. Housing is integral part of it. It is about economics. President has been working really, really hard to convince Congress to lift the minimum wage. It is about economics. It is about expanding economic opportunity. Congress hasn't really moved on that. But we have, in the context of housing policy and implementation of practices at the local level, we have, again, a unique opportunity with affirmatively furthering fair housing to connect the dots of opportunity, upward mobility, and housing availability for all. I believe that just by the fact that we're here talking about this together, we have started a great process of what will be this year for St. Charles, for Jefferson, next year and the subsequent years for other jurisdictions that are on the calendar for this region, a really important step. We've taken a really, really important step. And I applaud you for being here. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you the best for the rest of the conference. So thank you very much to all for being here.
The Assistant Secretary has agreed to a little Q&A. If you all want to line up, we have a few minutes to do that. Phil?
About the new Affirmatively rule being about more than just housing, crossing into other sectors. Could you talk a little bit about HUD's vision for the community engagement part of this rule, and how is it going to be different than the usual process?
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. I believe that we have to work in collaboration, the city, nonprofit groups, the business sector, to mobilize all sectors of our neighborhoods to come to the table to discuss what are the factors that are contributing to patterns of segregation, and how the city, the county, the region can take some action. What are the most important levers? What are the most significant and practical actions, steps that we can take? Now, mobilizing the community it takes the village, right, to ensure that everybody comes to the table. We have two wonderful organizations here. We have the city, we have the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, we have EHOC, but it's going to require a lot more. It's going to require reaching out to a lot of other nonprofit organizations. It's going to require engaging philanthropy, foundations at the local level. We're trying to seek support from foundations even at the national level so that they are helpful in coming to certain parts where these conversations will be most significant to contribute resources and support for community engagements, to convene people, to have these discussions with the resources that it takes to have them. This is going to take the will of the people. It's going to take, again, the different sectors mobilizing, but it does take resources for this convenience, to put together this convenience. So we at HUD, quite frankly, have support for the jurisdictions in the form of technical assistance. We will continue to support our FIP and FAP organizations. We believe that in the next few years, we are going to continue to advance norms so that FIP and FAP organizations focus a lot in AFFH community engagement. But I would be lying to you if I say that HUD is coming to all of these cities with resources to facilitate the community convenings that ought to happen in order for this to work. And so it's going to take a strong local and regional effort from groups that believe that this is, at this time in history, one of the most necessary conversations that cities, city governments, county governments ought to have with their citizens.
For those of you who are asking questions who are regional residents, if you would at least give the entity that you're coming from or where you live, just to give the Assistant Secretary some viewpoint on the types of questions.
Hello, my name is Rosalind Williams, and I'm a retired city planner, primarily having worked in suburbia. My question is whether HUD recognizes the difference between strong housing market cities and weak ones, and especially weak housing regions like Detroit and Cleveland and whatever. And St. Louis is considered one of the regional ones. So what are the different policy approaches that have to be taken in a St. Louis kind of place? And I also wanted to know whether HUD has, or the federal government has required other departments like transportation and others to help enforce fair housing through their investments in transportation, like the investment in transit versus highways and in additional sprawl. Thank you.
Yeah, on the kinds of policies, again, the idea here is not to be overly prescriptive. We want to make sure that we have a framework under which cities work so that they debate and consider the types of things that localities can do. I mean, HUD is a big place. We will continue working on things like expanding funding for mobility programs, for example. That is a desire. Something that in previous years HUD has talked a lot about, but we haven't had really a plan to advance this so that cities can take advantage of additional resources. So there are things that we can do in terms of actions that guide resource allocation, but that should not be the only aspect that moves decision-making at the local level. I think there are a lot of other, levers and actions with local, municipal, county, city authority. Issues that have to do with expansion of protections that, St. Louis seems to be in the right track doing, looking at land use, zoning policies. I mean, there are a wide range of things that local municipalities have control that can move the intent to further fair housing in the future. But I know that HUD also plays a role in being helpful in supporting through resource allocation some decisions that can be made easier by local governments. I also think that on the question of, this touches everything, right? It touches transportation, it touches issues of environmental justice, touches issues of education. So how can we be just operating in a vacuum without the other critical partners at the table? So we have engaged those partners at the federal level. We are trying to make sure that there are some direction and guidelines from those federal agencies to incentivize the participation of officials on the ground, on education and transportation and so forth. Metropolitan planning councils, regional planning entities are going to be extremely important to also bring stakeholders that take the view of, transportation options and those kinds of things. School districts being at the table is going to be extremely important to look at also policies at the school district level, school choice, placement, all of these things, all of these other things that are driven by other sectors in federal and local government it's going to be critical that they participate. So we're pushing hard at the federal level. We want to make sure that message trickles down so that when these discussions are happening, the right officials that touch other sectors participate as well.
Being mindful of the Assistant Secretary's time, we'll have one final question.
Good. My name's Tom Utterback, also a local citizen. By the way, could not agree more with your comments. Back in 1968, I was very active in the civil rights movement, saw the enactment of that, and then watched the city of St. Louis and the county of St. Louis as a community basically tried to avoid and get around every way they could the 1968 Act. To some degree, that battle still goes on. A follow-up question to the ladies in terms of question in terms of integrating things. I'm sure you're aware of the Department of Justice study that came out in 2014 entitled The Growth of Incarceration in the United States, Exploring Causes and Consequences. And a lot in this study speaks directly to every issue you were talking about here today in terms of education, in terms of community development, and so forth. Has your agency as yet formulated a direct or specific response to this with the idea of integrating what you do or dealing with these issues where in fact everyone has ignored these issues for the last 35 years?
No question that these issues of efforts to integrate returning citizens or lack of issues really compound segregation. This community is shut down from opportunity when they're returning and trying to integrate. At the national level, the White House has led a very robust strategy to do everything we can absent of Congress action. And again, we're still working this year to make sure that something is done on the criminal justice reform front. But at the executive action level, there are many things that have been happening and they will continue to happen throughout the rest of the administration. HUD, for example, recently published guidelines around the broadening the availability of subsidized publicly assisted housing for people who are returning citizens. We in the area, in the fair housing space, we need to do more, and we're thinking about expanding or clarifying how issues of denial in the housing market of persons with arrest and conviction records has a notorious, recalcitrant, disproportionately effect on people in the African American and Hispanic community. Let's not be kidding. We have now the reaffirmation from the Supreme Court that disproportionately effects in housing and policies and practices would violate the Fair Housing Act. We have that reaffirmation from the Supreme Court decision last year. So now we have a unique opportunity with the reaffirmation to talk more about what this means, what restricting people with arrest and conviction records mean in terms of violating the law and in terms of the more important, more significant issue, which is continue to shut down these people from opportunity. So reentry efforts are something that I think President Obama, Secretary Castro, other federal agencies are going to work until the very last day of the administration. We also need, for sure, Congress action on these issues because it's important. This is such a big problem that is going to take the leadership just across parties and across branches of government.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, thank you. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you, sir. Hold on. I believe the Director Wessels has a gift for the Assistant Secretary this time.
Thanks, Charles. Welcome, Mr. Secretary, to the City of St. Louis. Your remarks, I think, spoke to the core issues that we're here today to discuss. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to visit us. We hope you come back soon. On behalf of the Mayor, Mayor Francis Slay, who is vacationing in New Hampshire today, you may not be familiar with our patterns of vacationing here in St. Louis, but we like to go north during the winter. You know, Iowa's big in January. You know, Des Moines. But I want to give you this memento of our appreciation for you joining us here today. And again, we hope to see you often in the future. Thank you.